person I asked to lead prayer tonight is not here, so after we do something else, I'm going to ask if that person doesn't come in, I'm going to ask Scott Conley, if you will, to lead prayer. Not right now, but in a little bit, to give you time to think about it. But if the person comes in, you're out. Thank all of you for being here. Our last two lessons have to do with threats to the home and the family, or stresses as far as the home and family are concerned. There's a handout. If you didn't get one, there should still be some at each of the exits or entrances. And the reason I like to do that is there are several scriptures in there, and I realize that some of you won't read those, some of you won't take one, and that's all right. But for those who do, I'd like for you to have the scriptures to bear in mind. Thanks, Scott. Thank you. So, just keep in mind as we think about the home, that the home originated in the Garden of Eden. And it was through the acts of God, and shortly, we don't know how long, but sometime after God established the Garden of Eden and the homes there, then who else showed up? Satan showed up. And he has been around ever since. And he's still at work. In fact, and I'm going to refer to this book later on tonight, in a book written by Steve Farrar, F-A-R-R-A-R, entitled Point Man. And in that he says that Satan has two objectives as far as home and family is concerned. And one is to separate or to create the division between husbands and wives, and the other is to create division or separate fathers and their children. And I think that's pretty much the case. When we think about the home and the threats to it, we need to think about the purpose of homes to start with. We talked about some of these things early on, the idea that home needs to be a place where we're nourished both spiritually and physically, and in growth and development. I always think about that passage about Jesus when he was young, that he found favor with God and man, and how did he develop? What's that saying, Luke? Why did he find favor with God and man? Well, you all look that up and find out.
Wisdom and stature.
Thank you. Right. Wisdom and favor. So, and we've had, and Satan has been around ever since, trying to disrupt that. I'm going to read, and if you will, join me in reading from 2 Timothy chapter 3, if you will, either print or otherwise. 2 Timothy chapter 3, and then after I read this, we'll have a prayer, and then we'll go with our outlines for the class period. 2 Timothy chapter 3, and I'm reading from the New King James, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 3 of 2 Timothy. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times, and another translation says, not perilous times, but said times of stress. So know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And from such people turn away. For of this sort are those who creep into the households and make captives of gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Now as Jannes and Jambres resisted Moses, so do these who resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds, disapprove concerning the faith, but they will regress no further, for their folly will be manifest to all, as theirs was also. So we see something that was written long ago, that Does that remind you of any time? No? Yeah? What does that remind you? Today, yesterday, and tomorrow. Now, when it says in here last times, or at least the version I have in the last days, most people, I think, would agree that it's talking about the time, the dispensation, as we call it, that we're in. So the last times are here, have already come, and we deal with these kinds of things. I thought today, I was thinking about this class, and I thought probably a younger person should be doing these two, because whether it's appropriate or not, or whether it's accurate, I guess is a better word, people think that old people always are critical of young people. And there's probably some reason for that. And I would tell you that a long time ago, in fact it was 1998, I started a list of things that I wanted to try to be characteristic of me as I got older. So when I get older, this will come into play. Well, what's funny about that? But anyway, one of those things in there, and I'll tell you all, this is not what this class is about, but I'll tell you quickly. One of the reasons I did that, Rose's parents had both deceased by that time, and so had mine, and I had helped with some older people. For those who've been around a while, somebody like Ethel Hardcastle and some others that sometimes could be a little trying. So I wrote all these things. I think there's 17 or 19 of them that I wanted to sort of go by. And one was that if I wanted to lambast young people, then I should remember back to how I was as a young person. I was not perfect as a young person. I know you'll be shocked to learn that. So even though I am older and I'm going to look at this from the standpoint of somebody who has lived a long time, I hope at least partly I can recognize that as I was young and middle age and old age, now in the sunset of life, that I recognize I had some of the things to deal with that young people deal with now. Scott?
Right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. We thank you for this class that we've been able to be a part of the last several weeks. Thank you, Paul, Scott, and Randy, and their efforts. We know that we have a wonderful spiritual family here, Lord, but that does not make us immune from things that the devil are going to throw at us, whether it's a family or individually. We ask that you always be with us, help us to be on guard, help us to be in your word, just to remember that there are many ways that things can enter our home that ultimately do not belong there. Help us to work hard each day, Lord, to serve you, to be busy with your work. We know that at times we fall short. We know as parents and husbands and wives at times that we're not the best example for each other or for our kids or grandkids. We ask that you be with us daily, strengthen us, help us to be looking to make improvement, be looking to help others, and be looking to ultimately be the type of child you would want us to be as our Father. Again, we thank you tonight for this opportunity. We love you, and we ask that you continue to be with us, Lord. Help us to our minds to be on these things that we've talked about through the next several weeks, months, and years. And ultimately, we look forward to gathering around your throne with you. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. I want to begin this part by talking about just quickly, and I talked to Myra Dew about this the other night, so she said it was okay. What I would call the evolution of American culture. And if you think about, ours is not an old culture. When you come to I just start with the 1700s in our country. We were primarily an agrarian country. There were a few shops and all that sort of thing, but mainly people lived at home. Kids lived at home, sometimes a long, long time, which meant then that parents and children had a lot of time together and a lot of relationships together. The Industrial Revolution came along beginning in the late 1700s, which began a shift as far as our culture is concerned, and then we get into the 1800s, and some of those things begin to grow more in the direction of sort of separating between rural and urban areas were not very urban then. And all of that has to do with the relationships within the family. Because if you are in a farming area, and particularly if this was even earlier in the last century, or up through much of the last century, then kids were generally at home. If they went to school, they sometimes went to a one-room school close to home. The point about this is that girls were with their mothers and boys with their fathers in the field. And then up into the 1900s, of course, we had more industrialization. And then we come along to World War II, and all of those things changed fairly dramatically. We had Rosie the Riveter coming along when women were more into the workforce. And when World War II ended, women who had been working didn't go back to the home. Now, let me say quickly, that's not anti-woman. So don't you women be sensitive about it. My mother and my wife are women. I have, and as I told you all the first class, I taught the two biggest influences in my life have been my mother and my wife. So this is not anti-women, this is just trying to put some of these things in context as I see them. You may not see it this way. So anyway, when World War II ended, many of the women who had been in the workforce, because factories needed women then, because the number of men that were available had been gone into service. So that Rosie the Riveter, as it's referred to in history, continued to expand as Rosie and the Riveter. And then we get into the late 1900s and now into the 2000s, and more women are in the workforce. All of this has a bearing then as far as how our cultures go and as far as how homes are, as we see our homes and this sort of thing. And again, I'm not being negative about that. I just want us to see that all of that has had a bearing then as how our homes have evolved and how our culture has changed as far as homes are concerned. Again, that's not criticism of anybody, it's just how that is. The other thing that I would suggest we think about a little bit is the speed with which our culture changes. If you go back from the 1700s, the 1800s, it was really a gradual kind of thing. The day we're in now, culture changes so quickly. I told Mara this example the other night. When I was teaching Western in the 1960s, it dawned on me sometime in early to mid-1960s that no longer I couldn't tell by talking with a student or watching students in classes the ones who were from foreigners and the ones who were from urban areas. And the point about that is, now you could some, but it became more and more difficult. And that's because we just homogenized our culture. And it's because of television, it's because of all the other things that were coming along then. And all of these things, in my opinion, have a bearing on how we see our roles in life and the effect that culture has on us. And it's had on, as I look at those of you who are pretty young, you've been either the recipients or had it forced upon you a culture that you didn't have anything to do with. So all of this, I just mentioned quickly as a background to when we think about our homes and the threats that our homes will face. So do you think that the threats to homes and families are greater from the inside or from the outside? From within the family or from outside the family? Yes, it's not a yes or no. Which one do you think is more impactful? Things that go on within the family or things external to the family?
External.
I'm sorry?
External, outside.
Outside?
Definitely.
Inside. Okay. Well, what will determine that?
Type of family you have.
Who said that? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just said the type of family you have determines it.
And whether the family is structured and ordered along the lines of what God would have it to be. And I don't know what the answer is to that question, but I think it's something that we need to think about, because if the greater impact, if the greater stress and the greater threats come from within, then you probably can do more about that than you can for those who come from outside. In fact, those in the household are the ones who are going to create that environment one way or the other. So think about that as we go through this. A lot of other things to be said about that, but I'll leave it for right now. And again, as I said a few minutes ago, depends on the stage of the family as to how these threats will come about. And I would tell you that for those of us, and there are not many of us in here, for those of us who are in the latter phases of our lives, some of the things we dealt with earlier are not problems anymore. But then there's some that are problems now that we didn't have earlier. So it sort of depends. Okay, what do you see as threats to the family? We need to do this pretty quickly here. So what kind of thought do you have about threats to the family? I didn't hear that.
Well, kind of like, I guess, busyness.
Busyness, good. We'll come back to that one. And I'm so, Derek's not here. When Randy was teaching the other night, Derek wanted to know if people are busier now than they used to be or something like that. And I didn't say much in response to that, but I'll say some more tonight. What else? Busyness, what else? What are the threats? All of you are in a family. What threats do you deal with?
Social media.
Social media.
Selfishness.
Selfishness. And I didn't put that on the list, and I thought about it a lot, and I thought, well, it can't be endless. What else?
Pride.
Pride.
Lack of study, maybe, like lack
Okay.
of Bible
Yeah.
study.
You're talking about as far as scripture is concerned?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
lack of preparation in that
Yeah.
regard?
Yeah.
Money.
Money, 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 money. That's high on my list. What else? Well, if you look at your handout, there are several on there. I think 10, but I'm not sure. I'm really looking at some that are not on there. What do you all deal with that's stressful? Who in here has no stress? I don't have any.
Other people.
Other people? Yeah. Very good. So what about your family life is stressful?
Health concerns.
Health concerns, sure. And I don't have that on the list, but it surely is. And it's thinking about phases of life. I'll tell you, as people get older, for some reason there are more health concerns with older people than younger people. I've never understood that, but anyway, that's the case. Very good. What else?
With health concerns.
I'm sorry?
When the family, as the family ages and their parent, like with our parents,
Yeah.
that's another area where you have a lot of stress taking care of.
Yeah,
of your,
taking care
your
of
parents
older
and
parents.
taking care of.
Yeah, I'm really big on that now. Paul wrote to Timothy about that. I've told our kids about that. What else?
Work.
Work? I'm sorry?
Parenting kids.
Parenting kids. Yeah, but, well, never mind. You had something to do with that, but anyway. What else?
Kara says in-laws.
I just said that.
You'll pay for that. Anything else? Well, let's look at these that I have on my list. Well, the time's going to go here. The first one I have on there is that we live in a sinful world. And I'm not, if you look at the handout, there are scriptures by a lot of these, and I'm certainly not going to get to all these, but I put them there on purpose. In this sinful environment, those first two passages, first two in Genesis, have to do with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot made a decision, right? Which way to go? And we talk about he should have been smarter than that. Now let me remind all of us, except for those of us who are older, the decisions you make about these things, they're going to come to roost with you 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago from now. Now that doesn't mean they're all going to be bad. They may be good. They'll come to fruition at some point. And you need to think about that when you think about the seriousness of them. In John 17, that's on there, John 17, 14 through 16, that's a chapter in John where Jesus is praying to God, and the first he praises for himself, and then the second part of that, he prays for his disciples, and he prays to God that God would keep them from evil. So it's a sinful world that we're living in. Then 1 Corinthians 15, some people deny the effects of the resurrection. We resist the social pressures that come with that. Isaiah 59:2 says, your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you. And that's a world we live in, and that's true now as it was when this was written. And then in, I think I've got Romans 6:16 on there. That is that they were a slave to whom you obey, whether a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. So one of the first one I have on here is that we're in a sinful world, and can we do anything about that? Well, we're here, but can we do anything about it? Well, yes, we don't have to participate in those things. But we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize if you have children, those children are going to grow up in that same world. However, your house is going to be a sanctuary, if you will, not a sanctuary city, but a sanctuary as far as righteousness is concerned. Then the second one is the fast-paced lifestyle, or as we were talking about the other day, I think busyness. Several things I want to say about that. First of all, in Matthew 13:22, which I don't think I have on here, I'm not sure, I don't think I do. Anyway, it's talk about the cares of the world will choke out the Word of God. You need to think about that. We each do as we think about what we do every day. Who makes the decision about what you do every day?
We do.
We do, but is it absolute? You have absolute control over that? Well, I don't think so. You know, you have obligations to your family. If you have a job, you don't do that. But you have a lot of latitude in what you use your time for. And this goes back probably to Derek's question the other day. And then for those of you who are young and have children or anticipate having children, I would say, and it's easy for me now to say this because I'm not there, I would say that one of the things that's happening with a lot more frequency now than it did even 20 or 30 years ago, people are involving their kids in a lot more things than they used to. Now, I'm not, if you have your kids playing everything but Mumbly Peg, that's your decision. I'm not being critical of it, but I think you need to think about, and I know some families that say, okay, one child, each you can pick out, you get to play one event, one sport, if it's a sport or whatever it is, whatever you're doing, you get to do one. Not every child in here is going to participate in everything. And I am convinced, and you could say, no, not with me, I am convinced that a lot of times parents are having, and guys are worse about this, I think, than women, but maybe not. We are having our kids participate in sometimes vicariously. We wanted to be a great athlete, and we weren't as good as we wanted to be, but I'm sure my child is going to be in the next Olympics. So, you know, we have them participate in all of these things. If it's not sports, it's tiddlywinks, or it's whatever it may be. And as a result, if you've got 3, 4, 5 kids, you're going everywhere with them. I was thinking today, when the soccer complex was built out on Lover's Lane, Johnny Webb was mayor, and he got all kinds of criticism for that. I have told him several times, I thought that was really a forward-looking thing. The problem with that is, if you go out there, and there are 3 kids in the family, they're playing at 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and 12 o'clock. You know, we are sometimes, and I'm not picking out anybody in particular on this, we are sometimes more diligent in getting into those practices than we are to the assembly of the church. And I would just tell you that a lot of our busyness comes because that's what we want to do, even though we fuss about doing it after. We can control a lot of the busyness that goes on. I guess that's the end of that sermon. Anybody want to say anything about busyness? Anybody want a rebuttal? Well, then the next one is materialism. So the subtitles using scriptures. the deceitfulness of riches, the inordinate desire for things material. And there are several scriptures listed there. Again, I can't go through all those, but I mentioned those so you can think about them. You've got the one in Luke, what's called the rich young fool. We've got the rich man and Lazarus. In Matthew 6, I do want to mention that one. We're told there to lay up our treasures in heaven, and then Jesus says to them, your treasures are where what is?
Your heart is.
Where your heart is. Do you believe that? Do you think that's a valid statement Jesus has made? Has anybody in here proven that? Well, maybe. Several years ago, well, it was 1993, but just several years ago, Gary Henry, and some of you, many people know him, several don't. Gary Henry, the preacher who lives in Louisville now, and Gary Henry did a series of lessons, and he did them here, and the overall title was What's Hurting Us Right Now? And here are the topics he had. The topics were materialism. Our fascination with fun was the second one. The third one was crippled families, an overcrowded lifestyle, and then the shortage of personal evangelism. And I've got those, the details of all those lessons. We print them out and made them available to people. And I thought in 1993 they were really valid, and they are valid in whatever this year is. So a couple other things I'd say about materialism, then see what you want to say. Husbands sometimes spend so much time and energy on careers that leadership in the family is limited or non-existent. How many, both husbands and wives, question, how many hours per week do you spend working outside the home, or you can put that the other way, and then as a part of that, how many hours a week do you spend with your child? I don't know whether have any of you charted either at work, for example, have you charted by either 30 or 60-minute increments what you do in the work day? Anybody do that? Nobody's done that?
Used to have to do that.
I know it. And I did that one time when I didn't have to. I did that, I think, for a week. I'm not sure at the time. It's been too long. But I did it, I think, in 30-minute increments. And I made this chart, and I just wrote down there what I did. Well, one of the revealing things about it, which relates to what we're talking about here, is I realized how much I thought I was really doing good. I thought I really was keeping my nose to the grindstone. Then I looked at that chart at the end of the day, and I thought, wow, I wasted a lot of time in here. So you would be surprised, I think, if you charted how much time you spent with your mate, how much time you spent with your kids, and it's a revelation. What do you want to say about materialism? Materialism, an issue in our culture today. Why is it? What makes it a problem?
The almighty dollar.
Yeah.
People want to convince you to be discontent with what you have so that you will work harder and have more money to buy the thing you don't need.
And not to be critical of the people who manufacture things that they sell. We'll just deal with men's coats for a minute. Every so often, those who really know what wardrobe should look like, the lapels are either wider or more narrow. And then the ties have to be with that. If the lapels are wide, the ties need to be wide. If the lapels are narrow, the ties need to be narrow. Then they change after 3 or 4 years because clothes will last longer than that. But if you don't have that, then if you're in the wrong place, then you're out of whack. And look what's going on with furniture right now. We were in a furniture store the other day. All the furniture is light colored, but now they're beginning to sneak in a little bit to dark. And pretty soon you come back. I'm sorry about that, but anyway, is most of your furniture? Never mind. That's right. And then pretty soon, in another 3 or 4 years, the big floor prints and all those things will be back. And we get caught up in that, and we think, well, our house can't look like that. What if Mrs. So-and-so comes in and sees that our furniture is not right? And then, have you ever looked at the parking lot at this church building when church is going on? The cars in this parking lot would absolutely make a used car dealer tearful. It's just, We do all these kinds of things to get cars. We have a dent in the left fender of our back left fender of our car that's been there 2 or 3 years, and Rose is not happy because I won't get it fixed. And I don't know why I haven't gotten it fixed, other than I just want to say you can drive a car with a dent in it. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the performance of the car. But we are so materialistic in our things that we just have to have everything right. You know, as we've gotten uptown, these things all affect us. And they affect us spiritually, which is the worst thing about it. And we, you know, we come in and say, did you see what she had on today? Wasn't that gorgeous? Well, if it was modest, it didn't matter whether it was gorgeous or ungorgeous. What else on materialism?
Causes a lot of insecurity.
It causes all kinds of insecurity, doesn't it? Thank you. It really does. You think women or men are worse about that?
Men.
Men.
Depends
Good.
on what it is.
Materialism. What else you want to say about materialism? Well,
It's similar to, you know, talk about social media. Everybody wants likes and they want to be seen, and it's a status symbol, the car, and getting a new one and getting all the bells and the whistles because you want to be happy. You think that's going to make you happy,
yeah.
but it doesn't. It does a little bit.
It's going to hit you over there just a little bit.
But what I'm saying is it wears off.
Anything else? Okay. The next one I have on here is inadequate male leadership. And we have read Ephesians 5 and up. I'm not going over there to that. I mentioned a minute ago about the book by Steve Farrar. This is called The Point Man. And it's the subtitle of it is How a Man Can Lead a Family. And it's called A Point Man because the kind of his approach in this is a military approach. This was written in 1980, and you can still buy it. I thought I'd check and see the other day. It's a really good book. I've had it a long time. And it has a lot, it's just about male leadership in the home. And he is using the idea of a military. And when a platoon goes out, the point man is the one that's in the front. And if there's battle going on, who's likely to be shot first? The person in the front. And that's his point about this, but that the father, that the husband should be the point man in these things and should provide the leadership as far as families are concerned. And, I don't know, fathers and husbands just have to hold on to their role as leaders, and if it's if leadership, man, has to be earned. You don't just get to be a leader because you're born male, but it has to be earned, and it has to be earned according to the will of God. So there are a lot of things, and we've talked about leadership in here, so I won't try to redo that one, but I do want to mention that, and I think that our culture today has made it more difficult for men to be the kind of leaders they need to be. Anybody comment about that? The next thing is, is radical feminism. And again, remember I said I'm not anti-female, so just remember that we'll talk about this. The thing about radical feminism is that it upsets the order of God. And the passage on there in 1 Corinthians has to do with that. I've got on there the passages in 1 Corinthians have to do with head covering. And it's not anything, I don't want you to read it, you can read for the head covering, but it deals with the male leadership. And God set that up. And let me just say, you all know this, we're in a time in our culture in which male leadership is being attacked from a lot of different areas. And one of the things that's happening, and I'll take this up some maybe in another topic on Sunday, but one of the things that's happening in our culture is that so many parts of our society are anti-family and they're anti-male leadership. A couple of years ago, when our family was together at the High Holiday, since we have several small great-grandchildren, I just said to them, we need to quit buying stuff from Disney. Now, 2 years later, it didn't diminish any, so I was really effective on that. But I'm serious about this. When you think about where Disney stands and where a lot of other corporations stand on moral issues, on the sexual issues, we shouldn't be supporting them, but that's your business. And I don't know whether we bought in or not, I hope not. I do remember sometimes we were looking at some gifts and I said, Rose, let's not get that, that's from Disney. Now, the competitors are probably just as bad. But we're at a point in our culture where the suppliers of goods and services in this country are into all of these social changes. And we see this in almost every aspect of our lives. And it's difficult. Let me just say this that I should have said in the beginning, but I have it here in the radical feminism because of the upset of the order. I'll just say to you, for thousands of years, societies realized that permanent partnership between a husband and a wife, a male and a female husband or wife, for nurturing children was the best choice for the happiness of the family and for the society. And even Napoleon, or not even Napoleon, the great French leader, Napoleon talked about the family. He talked about mothers and how important they were. Now, you know, his main emphasis was militarism, but he recognized that held it together. Some of you remember in the 1800s, the French historian who came here for about 4 years and studied the American culture and what made American what it was. And he looked at the democracy, but he looked a lot at homes and churches and the impact that they had on our culture. And we are losing a lot of that. There are some verses there. Look at those. Number 6, and I'll just mention this quickly, humanism and secular education. And humanism, in a very general sense, is any system of thought that begins with the individual alone, the individual on his own. And I would particularly suggest you read Romans chapter 1, verses 20 through 32. And those people have the idea that wisdom, not in Romans, but the idea of humanism is that wisdom originates with the individual so that the person decides what's good. And this produces what we used to call for a while the me generation. The emphasis is on the person. And then as far as secular education is concerned, for those of you who have children in school, I really would suggest you try to find out what's going on in the schools. Like I said, I'm not anti-feminism. This is not a political statement. This has to do with where we are as far as education and the influence. And there are good teachers and there are good people in the school systems. There are also those forces that are going on that are really trying to move our society in the direction that's not healthy. I'm going to mention in connection with another point, but I'll put it in here. The Kentucky legislature this year, in Kentucky, as far as how the nation would look at it, Kentucky has a very conservative legislature. One of the things that Kentucky legislature did this year was change the law about how old you had to be to serve alcohol. You had to be 21 until this last legislative session, and they lowered it to age 18. Now, the purveyors of alcohol were the ones who wanted that because they said we can't find employees, so if you lower it by 3 years, then we can find more employees. That's done by a government body, and there are a host of other kinds of statements about government agencies and government bodies that are trying to do things in our culture that make life more difficult for families. What do you want to say about any of that? You're all pretty quiet tonight, aren't you? And I realize that, you know, talking about this is not comforting because, as I say, it's where we live. And I would tell you, I wanted us to start out with the passage in 2 Timothy. That was written all these years ago. And so these things have been going on for a long time. And we can't change I don't know about you all, I'll put it this way. I can't change the world, but I can change what?
You,
Me and
yourself.
my family, and how we do. And let me tell you, folks, this is a pretty good sized group of Christians that convenes here. We can also do that. I don't think I mentioned this in here. We have in this congregation between 25 and 30 couples where both are still living that have been married 50 years or more. That says something. Maybe it says the wives are forgiving. I'm not sure what it says. But just think about that. That gives you a goal to shoot at, and it says something about how a lot of people here have seen the commitment they made. That, I think, says something about where we are. Okay. I wanted to leave part of this for Sunday. You'll be glad to know that, I'm sure. Let's see. Humanism. Oh, I'll begin and end with the next one. The permissiveness of related to sexual matters. And we have, in my lifetime, which admittedly has been a long time now, in my lifetime, we have changed so about what we say in mixed crowds. I've said this maybe once before in here, I'm not sure. When I was a kid, the word pregnant was not used in public, so it was not used. And when women became with child, they wore bigger garments at the top that sometimes are referred to as hatching jackets. And I assume you all hadn't heard that. And you know, they didn't want people to know they were pregnant. But we have now gone from that extreme. There ain't nothing that we don't talk about now. I mean, we've just gone from one extreme to the other. And you know, maybe 10 years from now, the extreme marker will be moved forward or backward. I don't know. So our culture now, and a lot of this has to do with all of the social media. Before that, with mass communication. A decade and a half ago, when we talked about these things, we talked about the mass communication. Now they're social things. So we are in an age where we're just free about all these things. We're at a point in time in our country, I think, where people want absolute freedom. They want freedom for abortion. Oh, and abortion, let me just mention quickly. I read a statement the other day that has really stuck with me. I never thought about this. This writer said, the most dangerous place in the world for a child is in the womb. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. But it's also true. So, you know, we're at a point in our culture where those of us who are Christians need to really let our light shine. If you bring your light back on Sunday morning, we'll finish this. Thank you all.